Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bet Chabad, Chabad of Rechavia, and Nachlaot, right here in Yerushalayim. And welcome back to our daily class at 9:30 a.m. right here, Yerushalayim time. Time for Tanya. And so we're inching towards the end of Perek Lamed Bet, of chapter 32, and we're talking about the fine difference between recognizing a person's specialties and perhaps understanding the negativity that someone might be doing, and we have to love them, we have to appreciate them for the good that they have, for who they are, and not at all for what they've done. Okay, so towards the end of the text that we learned yesterday, we learned as follows. Lomar, it's the second page if you're looking at the original text of the Tanya, and it's 6 lines, we're 6 lines from the top to the dot. Unless you're looking at the text that we uploaded at the beginning of the week to our Facebook page. Just one moment, please. Okay, now it's a little better. Lomar, that means to say, Sha'af harachokim mitirat Hashem va'avodato, that even those that are far from Hashem's Torah and avodat Hashem and the service of Hashem, V'lachein, and therefore nikraim, they are called b'shem briot ba'alma, just regular creations, creatures of Hashem, so to speak. Tzarich l'mashchan, we have to draw them, we have to hold on tight. B'chevlei avotot ava, with very strong ropes of love. This can be compared to what the Torah says in Parashat Ha'azinu, the second to last parsha of the Torah. Yaakov, Chevel Nachalato. Yaakov, which refers to Am Yisrael, is the rope of his inheritance. What does that mean? Yaakov, Chevel Nachalato, means that in our connection to Hashem, the neshama, our neshama is a chevel, is a strong rope. And this strong rope is made up of 613 tiny strings, very thin strings, but when you take more than one string and you weave them together, then it becomes very strong. Can you imagine when we have 613 strings intertwined together? Wow, that's a very, very strong connection. And so our neshama is strongly bonded with Hashem. Yaakov chevel nachalato. Yaakov, our inheritance, is this rope which connects us to Hashem. Now what happens if someone, God forbid, violates one mitzvah of the Torah? Then that specific little string gets disconnected. What happens if, God forbid, someone violates many mitzvahs of the Torah? Then the rope begins to be very, very weak. Then what happens if, God forbid, someone violates all the mitzvahs of the Torah? So from a very simple perspective, at first glance, the entire rope, God forbid, is disconnected. So the entire person is disconnected from their source. That, it makes sense, but it's not 100% accurate. Because the Alter Rebbe once said a statement which was repeated by the previous Rebbe, that in Yiddish it sounds the best. Ayid niter will, niter kon, sein in ganzen abgerissen von der Eibishter. A Jew, not they can and not they want to be totally disconnected from Hashem. So it could be a person who thinks, I don't want any connection, Chalila, with Hashem or with Torah. It's impossible for someone at their core to be disconnected from Hashem. So what happens when someone, Chalila, violates all the mitzvahs of the Torah, or most, and they're hanging on by a hair, or two hairs, two strings, two very, very light strings? That's a very fragile connection to Hashem. And the answer is that that is only when we talk about the revealed connection to Hashem. When we talk about the core of a Jew, it's impossible to be disconnected from Hashem. So obviously, when we nurture the more revealed relationship with Hashem, then we are building and strengthening our chevel, our rope. But at the end of the day, we have a connection which is far deeper than and much stronger than the connection, the bond of Hashem, with Hashem, which is built through our learning Torah and doing mitzvot. Just like we have this chevel and connection and bond with Hashem, we also have this bond between one Jew and another. All of us are connected with this huge rope. So one might think that maybe if someone momentarily disconnects from their friend, maybe the bond they've parted between the two, and there's no more connection. The answer is that just like by a Jew and Hashem, it's impossible to disconnect a Jew from Hashem. So too, from one Yehudi to another Yehudi, from one Jew to their friend, it's impossible to disconnect between the two. So on one hand, we have to nurture the relationships. On the other hand, we have to remember that at the end of the day, the bond is there whether we like it or not. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha is a question of revealing and nurturing the relationship which is already there. As we'll see soon in the text of the Tanya, that this point will become even clearer. Let's continue. When a person draws closer their friend to themselves with these strong ropes of ahava, of love, the kulei hai ve'ulai, perhaps there is even a little bit of a percent of chance yuchal lekarvan l'torah v'avodat Hashem, that the person will be able to bring them closer to Torah and the service of Hashem. V'hein lo, and if not, and if a person will not succeed to bring their friend closer to the service of Hashem, lo hifsid, you did not lose out sachar mitzvat ahavat reim, the reward of the mitzvah of loving your fellow Jew. You know, there's a slogan in Chabad of Israel that says in Hebrew that they want to publicize the Chabad house of a certain area. So we say that this is the center for everything Jewish. In other words, sounds great, and it is great. For whatever a person wants, this is a center for people to feel at home. But I suggest that I think it's called Hamerkaz L'Kol Inyan Yehudi. So I suggest Hamerkaz L'Kol Inyan, the center for everything, period. Not only for every Jewish thing. Obviously, you see a Jew, you want to bring them in and put on tefillin with them and give a woman Shabbat candles to light and bring light to the world. There's no question about that. But I've seen very clearly that sometimes it's not only about the Judaism that you want to share with a person. Very often, it's just helping a person even without any connection to Yiddishkeit. Obviously, it's connected to Yiddishkeit because the Torah says we have to be kind and we have to help every person. But there may not be any direct connection. Nevertheless, We do it because it's a mitzvah. And you know what? When we act in such a way, people, they open up and they realize that we're there for them and not necessarily for some ulterior motive that we want them to do, therefore we're helping them. And the best example is right now, during the Corona crisis, that we have the great zechut of having amazing volunteers going out to help people who literally are quarantined, whether because of the Corona or because they're elderly and they cannot move around, especially now that many of the stores are closed. And this is the cherry of the cake. This is the beauty of Chabad. This is the beauty of Am Yisrael. This is the beauty of the Torah, that we're able to bring people together, where people who want to help are helping people who are needy. And you want to know what's the most amazing thing that I've encountered over the past week or so? That there are many more volunteers than people who actually need the help. That's amazing. What an amazing Am Yisrael we are. That so many people want to go out there and help others. That is so inspiring. And so that's what the Alter Rebbe says over here. Up until this line, we've learned that through the fact that you'll embrace another Jew, you'll bring them closer to Torah and doing the mitzvahs. But now he says that even if not, even let's say the person is so far away that they're totally not interested, at least on the surface, of learning Torah and doing mitzvot. Lo hifsid schar mitzvat ahavat hareim. You have not lost the reward of the mitzvah of loving your fellow Jew. Because at the end of the day, if you've expressed your Ahavat Yisrael, then that's what counts. It doesn't matter as much or at all if the person responds. That would be wonderful. That would be remarkable. But even if not, don't worry, because you've not lost out the mitzvah of Ahavat Yisrael. Let's move on in the text. V'gam ha'mekuravim elav, and also the people that are close to him. V'hochicham, like we said yesterday, we learned earlier the mitzvah of hocheach tocheach et amitacha, to rebuke your friend. V'lo shavu mi'avonotehem, even after that you've rebuked them, people that you're close to, people that are on your level of Torah mitzvot, and they have not yet returned and done teshuvah from their sins, that we've learned earlier, several lines ago, shemitzvah l'snei otam, that there's a mitzvah to love them. Nevertheless, mitzvah la'avam gamken, it's also a mitzvah to love them. It's also a mitzvah to embrace every single, to love them. Listen to this. It's a mitzvah to hate them, and it's a mitzvah to love them. It's almost like the joke where the two people come to the rabbi, and one person said, he offended me. He said, you're right, he did something wrong. The other guy said, I didn't offend him. He says, you're right, you probably didn't offend him. So the Rebbitzin comes running in and says, my dear husband, how could they be both right? And the rabbi says, you're also right. How could you have mitzvah l'snei otam, the mitzvah of hating them, and also mitzvah l'ahavam, mitzvah to love them? Ushtehen hein emet. And both of them are true. Both of them are correct. Even before we read the words of the Alter Rebbe, I want to suggest a simple interpretation. That the fact that it's a mitzvah to hate them, as the Talmud says, we learned yesterday, it's not real hate. In other words, it's only a quote-unquote mitzvah to hate them. As we learned yesterday, that really, it's almost impossible for that scenario to be realistic. That specific scenario that the Talmud talks about. So it's a mitzvah, the Torah says you have to hate them. But in depth, we really have to love them, as we're going to see in a moment. Mitzvah la'avam gamkin. Let's continue. It's also a mitzvah. Ushtein hein emet, and both of them are true, are valid. How could that be? How could you have, on the one hand, to continue to hate them, and on the other hand, to love them? So it depends what we're talking about. Sina mitzad harasha bahem. The hate is not them. You don't need to hate them, chas v'shalom. We hate the negativity which is in them. We hate the bad, the ra. And then it's a mitzvah to love them. The ahava mitzad b'chinat hatov. And love because of their good. Haganuz shebahem, which is hidden deep down. Sometimes it's very, very deep, but it's there. And we have to try to push away the dirt, push away the mud, and blow away the dust, and reveal that good which is deep down within them. What is that good? Shehu nitzutz elokut shebetocham. This is the spark of godliness which is deep down inside of them. Hamchayeh nafsham elokit, which livens their godly soul. Okay? Up until here, is that clear? That we need to have love for the godly spark which is deep down inside of them. Now he says another point. Not only do we need to love them, but v'gam, and also l'orer rachamim b'libo aleha. We need to awaken within ourselves mercy on it, on her. What is that it? That is the neshama. Kihi b'bchinat galut b'toch hara. Because the neshama is sort of trapped into the body. It's almost like galut. It's like exile. Before the neshama came down into this world, it was up high by Hashem's kisei hakavod, holy throne, and then it was able to enjoy the wonderful pleasure of light and spirituality in the most revealed sense. But now, the neshama came down into this body, and this body is unfortunately unwilling to go along and to help the neshama express itself and to learn Torah and do mitzvot. So therefore, we need to have rachmanut. We need to have compassion for the neshama. It is so sad that it's trapped into the body. And then, varachmanut mevatelet hasin'ah. And when we have, I just skipped a couple of words by mistake, so let's go back 4 or 5 words. Misitra achra, that's the abbreviation. Hagover aleha barashayim. So by an evil person, by a rasha, it's not that he doesn't have the good. He has the good. Simply, the bad, the evil, the materialism of the world, the coarseness of this world overpowers over the good, over the neshama. Isn't that sad? That's very, very sad. That's a big rachmanut. V'harachmanut mevatelet hasin'ah. Here's the key. And the rachmanut and the pity nullifies the hate. U'ma'oreret ha'ava, and awakens the love. In other words, remember we said earlier that they're both true. You have to have the sinna, the hate, and the ahava, and the love. So the compassion nullifies the hate and awakens the love. Kenoda, as it's known, mimash katuv, as it says in the verse, liYaakov asher pada et Avraham, that Yaakov redeemed Avraham. We'll explain this concept in just a moment, Bezrat Hashem. And right at the end, there's a little note in the square brackets. V'lo amar David HaMelech alav hashalom. David HaMelech, King David, did not say in chapter 139 in the Tehillim, Tachlit sinas neitim, I hate them Betachlit. I totally hate my enemies. How could David the Melech say, I hate my enemies? Didn't we just say that we need to love every single Jew, even if their neshama is really covered over the body, the coarseness of the world covers over their body. So the answer is that David the Melech wasn't just speaking about a regular person or regular Rasha. David the Melech was speaking Ella al Haminim v'Apikorsim, the people who deny Hashem's existence, and they deny in the divinity of the Torah. She'ein lehem chelek be'Elokei Yisrael, they don't have a portion in the God of Israel. Kedeita b'Gemara, as it says in the Talmud, Reish Perek Tetzayin de Shabbat, the beginning of chapter 16 of Tractate Shabbat. So let's first explain the concept of Yaakov Asher Padat Avraham. What does that mean? Yaakov that redeemed Avraham. You might be familiar with the fact that our three forefathers, how could that be? 3 forefathers. Anyways, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You might be familiar with the basic concepts in Kabbalah, and even if you're not, you can understand it now, that Avraham Avinu was the level of chesed. He represented the kindness of Hashem in this world. And that's why he had so much chesed and so much kindness that in the middle of the desert, he had an open tent on all 4 sides. This is just one example of his great chesed and understanding and kindness for every single person, even a person like Nimrod, as the Medrash teaches us, that tried to kill him and throw him into the furnace. On the other hand, Yitzchak represented the idea of Gevura. Gevura is strength, and sometimes it's translated as severity. And let's use another word of withdrawal. As opposed to the concept of giving, chesed, kindness, Gevura is withdrawal, where a person, like for example, now where we all have to be in quarantine, we all have to be, there's almost a total lockdown over here in Eretz Yisrael, and we can't go anywhere, we have to stay home. That's why there's a little bit of noise. I'm here right outside on the porch of my home in Rechavia, and we have to be a little more reserved. It's not necessarily a negative thing. You might want to listen to Rabbi Manis Friedman's amazing lecture that we posted on Facebook from our YouTube channel of Chabad Rechavia. And so, it's not necessarily a negative thing. Then you have step number 3, that's Yaakov Avinu, Tiferet. Tiferet is beauty. Beauty is where you have a colorfulness of at least more than one color. One color can be boring, but then when you have more than one, that's colorfulness, that's beauty. That's a blending of different concepts together. And Yaakov Avinu, he blends together Avraham and Yitzchak. What does it mean to blend chesed, kindness, and Gevura, strength, and withdrawal? Seemingly these are 2 opposite ways of methods of emotion. The answer is that pure chesed is not good. Because, just take an extreme example, if someone says, I want to give charity to a terrorist organization, God forbid, I want to be giving, the person can say. And so obviously the answer is that that's not good. You need to have Gevura. Gevura to stop. Gevura, withdrawal. I'm sorry. Not always is chesed good. That's where the Tiferet comes in and says, we have to be able to have a healthy balance. We can't have just chesed or just Gevura. We have to have a healthy balance of being able to know when is the right time to do the chesed, and when is the right time to do gevurah. So here's a little bit of a more diluted example of where you have a person that's unfortunately laying on the floor in a subway station, and you never saw the person, but the person obviously needs charity. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to give him something, a shekel, a dime, a quarter, a dollar, whatever it is. Then you say to yourself, 1 second, why should I give him this money? I don't know him. It's my hard-worked money. He doesn't deserve it. Then comes step number 3 and says, true, I acknowledge that he may not deserve it, but you should still give it to him. Because he's a human being. And someone that needs your quarter is going to help him live, is going to give him a little bit of food for the next few hours. So, give it to him. In other words, the Rachmanut, the Tiferet, is acknowledging the Chesed, acknowledging the Gevurah, and nevertheless coming to a bottom line, a total of, give it to him. We need to have compassion. We need to have compassion, Rachmanut. That's exactly what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. The verse that states, Yaakov asher padat Avram, Yaakov redeems Avram. We have both ideas. We have the ahava and we have the sinah. Sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes we need to have the hate. We for sure need to have the love, the ahava. And so what does Yaakov Avinu come along and say? True, perhaps we need both. The Avraham, the ahava, the Yitzchak, the sinah, because Torah says so. So I, Yaakov, am coming along and I'm going to say, well, I think we need to have a balance of the two. We need to reveal the ahava, and then that dilutes the sinah naturally. Once we have rachmanut, if you remember, we said earlier that if you only look at the gevurah, you won't give the guy the money because he doesn't deserve it. But then when you have the rachmanut, when you have the tiferet, the beauty, you try to blend everything together, that pushes the sinah much, much lower, and it reveals me'orer, it awakens the ahava, it awakens the love of one Jew to another. And then automatically, from this outpour of love, then the sinah almost fades away. And this is a very, very important message. Because us, as human beings, sometimes it's difficult for us to reveal this love for a person. Whether we never saw the person ever, or maybe because they offended us and did something wrong to us. Nevertheless, we have to have rachmanut. Just like we said earlier, we have to have pity on the neshama that is trapped in the body and cannot express itself the way it would like, and it cannot express itself the way it needs to, the way it used to before it came down into this world. Nevertheless, we have to have rachmanut, and that helps us connect to someone which might be on a very low level. But we are not allowed to let our own ulterior motives get in the way, even though it might be difficult. We have to be very, very focused on the Torah and what Hashem wants from us. And the more we learn about another Jew, what a neshama means, then Be'ezrat Hashem will be able to be lo'orer rachamim rabim b'libo Allah. We'll be able to awaken tremendous compassion for the person. You know, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov once said that a person, the Baal Shem Tov once said that we have to love a Jew that we never saw in our lives like we love a brother and a sister, a sibling, a family member, a close family member. It used to be, before the Baal Shem Tov came along, that people had a strong connection to their families, which is amazing. But someone that didn't know, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are, so very common that people should embrace someone who they never saw. And the Baal Shem Tov came along and taught an out-of-the-box teaching that just like we love a sibling and a close family member, so too we should love even a Jew that we never saw in our lives. Today, we don't need to tell most of Am Yisrael to love someone who we never saw. It's so common, it's so beautiful. In shuls, someone walks in, wow, how are you? Come over to my house for Shabbat dinner. What do you mean? But you never saw the guy in your life. Doesn't matter. We're all the same. We're all one. Go to the kotel. Go to any of the marketplace, whatever it is, lahavdil. We see someone, even if they've asked, if they've not asked, we're always very embracing. And the Baruch Hashem, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov has become deeply enrooted in our DNA. But then, I think today, change around this statement that we have to love our sibling just like we love a Jew that we never saw before in our lives. And this is a bit painful to be in the public life and to see so many families which unfortunately are broken, are split up, people don't talk to each other for years. And that hurts. Because if it's so simple that we can love a Jew that we've never seen, what happened to the intrinsic love that Hashem created us with, that we need to have with our siblings, with our close family members? Whatever happened to the brotherly love? Of course, the joke is brotherly love that also fights. But there's a limit. There's a limit. We cannot forget about this message of Ahavat Yisrael, not only for people who we have a good reason to love them, or we've never seen them, but even someone that may have offended us, even someone that may have done something that's really deeply against any logic. Nevertheless, we need to reveal our connection to them. Obviously, if it's going to bring more nachat and more happiness to the parents, then for sure we need to love them. For sure we need to shower upon them, upon our siblings, upon our friends, upon our close circle of people who really should be in our close circle of love. We should definitely exercise our Ahavat Yisrael and not, God forbid, to lead them to the side. I just want to finish off with an amazing story that happened right here in Israel. And it's regarding a person who was the head of the Communist Party over here in the Knesset, unfortunately. We're talking about 40, 50 years ago. His name was Vilner. And he was very, very despised by the majority of the state of Israel. And he once got up in the Knesset about 3 months after the 6-Day War, and he gave a speech about being all-inclusive with the Arabs, and he said that the fact that we went out to war that were even worse than the Nazis. And this statement was taken so difficult that especially the Holocaust survivors, they experienced the Holocaust, to hear such a statement was totally destructive. And that night, the guy came home, and someone was waiting for him in his apartment building, and they stabbed him. And afterwards, one of the writers in one of the central newspapers here in Israel wrote a whole article against him, and they wrote about what happened, of course, and they wrote that it was a pity that the knife was not sharp enough and it was not stabbed deep enough. A couple of days later, he was in New York. The writer, he was in New York, and it was during the holiday of Sukkot, and he heard about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he wanted to receive a piece of honey cake, as the Rebbe would distribute during the month of Tishrei. The Rebbe would distribute honey cake, lekach we call it. And there were thousands of people going by. The Rebbe would stand in the sukkah, and as he went by, the Rebbe said, like to everyone, Shana Tova. And then the Rebbe said to him, you don't write like this about another Jew. And he went by, and he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that the Rebbe recognized who he was. And that's what's on the Rebbe's mind when everyone is going by so quickly for a split moment. And the Rebbe said such a statement to him, that you don't write about a Jew. Now, who are we talking about? We're talking about a person who was despised by the vast majority of Jews in Israel and abroad, who was the head of the Communist Party here in Israel. And that's what's on the Rebbe's mind. And when he went back, he decided that he's going to speak to Vilner, and Vilner had already. I'm not sure if he spoke to. Yeah, I believe. Yes, if I remember correctly. I'm sorry that I'm drawing a bit of a blank, but when he came back to Israel, he shared with this individual the story and how the Rebbe cared about him. And Vilner himself, before he passed away, he wrote a letter, and he asked for this. He asked for this letter to be opened and printed after he died. And the title of the letter, of the article, was "Regards from Hell." And he writes over there how his soul went up. He obviously wrote this beforehand, but he writes over there how his soul went up to heaven, and all the gates of heaven were closed, only hell was open. And they, without any questions, they put him right to Gehenna, right into hell. And then he writes, there is one beacon of light which shone upon him, a beautiful smile, a radiant tzaddik, came and pulled him directly right out of Gehenna and said, I'm going to take care of him, put him right into Gan Eden. And so this shows, this is an explanation for the final quote of this chapter, that David HaMelech said, Tachlit sinas neitim, that I've hated my enemies extremely, totally hated them. The Alter Rebbe says that refers to someone who denies Hashem's existence. But perhaps on a deeper level, when it comes to a Jew that even is so far from Am Yisrael, that even he's in the level of an apikoros, God forbid, and denies the divinity of the Torah, even such a person, in some level, in some way, even that person has a very deep connection with Hashem. They themselves might not be aware of it, but the Rebbe, being such a tzaddik, and was so concerned for every single Jew, even such a person which almost the entire Am Yisrael hated, that teaches us how to love every single Jew, even a person who is on the level that David HaMelech says that I've hated him totally and there's no love. Even for such a person, there's room for love. Now, I would like to finish off by saying I look forward to seeing you right here tomorrow, 9:30 online on our Facebook page right here.